Okay. Now we're live. All right. So everyone, welcome to a MG Rogue Saturday broadcast. This is Making Mental Asylums Great Again, MMAGA. A little while ago, maybe a little over a year ago, I had sent something out as sort of a half joke about making mental asylums great again. And here we are. It's been an ongoing banter back and forth between those that are mostly sane against those many people who are insane, as it were. So, and here we are. And I have with me Mr. TJ Martinell and Mr. Chest Rockwell. What's up, Red? See you in the chat. Thanks for joining us. So most people, I mean, this is sort of, we did this sort of tongue in cheek. So there's an element of facetiousness about it, but it also is, I think, is important from a mental health standpoint, historically, where we've come from as far as the psychiatric community and the shutting down, the deinstitutionalization of the large commercial-based psychiatric facilities. I know in New Jersey there's still that are in operation, one in Ancora and one in Trenton, both of which I'm not too far from, and I've visited on several occasions in the discharging of my own counseling duties when I was in the psych field. So we can talk about that as well. What's up, Nick? So just a little bit of background too. The first mental health official on record goes back to the Byzantine Empire, 500 AD. So this kind of the concept of this has been around for a while. The issue has always been, and you see this in Hollywood and stories, you're going to either see that mental health facility is portrayed as this idyllic sanatorium type thing that's very positive, just a few. More often than not, it's portrayed as this horrendous prison where people are beaten, and it's like this therapeutic tyranny. And not to say that didn't happen. That did happen. We've come a long way as far as what we know about the mind, and we still don't know that much. I mean, we still don't know why Tylenol works. It doesn't kill us. We take it, it works. Okay, that's fine. We don't care. We don't care about the origins of it. But so there is an element of, hey, Vince, guys, what are you talking about? Mental health facilities they're horrible. They were never great. Well, in some aspects, yes, they were. And there are reasons for that we're going to get into. So that's my beginning spiel. TJ, Jess, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that... Oh, go ahead, Jess.
Oh, sorry. No, I completely agree with Vince on this one, that there's been a stigma placed with going away and being put away someplace in lieu of outpatient therapy and the use of drugs, as opposed to changing the way people behave by giving them the freedom to relearn behaviors someplace safe, which I think is one of the benefits of the institutionalization in some aspects. And you get to also, get therapy 2-3 hours a day, every day, intensively with someone who's right on site, and experience the benefits from that. And I don't think that there's enough of that today. And I also believe that there's also a celebration in some senses of having mental illness, or in fact indulging in mental illness to the point where it makes you somehow superior to the rest of us who don't have those particular issues. And that's a cultural problem that's gone along with abject failure to treat the general population for things as simple as depression and bipolar disorder.
Correct. Absolutely. TJ, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah. So let's get at the heart of the issue of like the purpose of mental asylums. And it's the understanding that there are people out there who they're not criminals. They haven't committed a crime, but their behavior is not conducive to a stable, functioning society. And they engage in behavior that causes harm to people around them. And it may not even be as a result of, to use a libertarian perspective, they talk about aggression or violence, but these people may not even engage in violence or aggression in their behavior. But what they do is their behavior causes a variety of different societal harm. And an example of that is when people are delusional, they have a completely warped perception of reality and they live that out in their lives. And without intervention, people are forced to cater to that, or they're at least forced to deal with that. But it also causes normal people, it creates an environment in which being insane or being out of your mind is normal. You want a society in which people can be believed at face value, as opposed to having to wonder if the person next to you is insane or is going to have a rational reaction to what you're saying, or as opposed to, like what we see today is people are, you have no idea whether the person you're talking to is mentally ill or not, because we don't have that kind of segregation anymore. So the purpose of mental asylums was to put these people in places where they could get either treatment or they would be placed away from the rest of society, so society would be protected from this. I was talking to an elderly neighbor in my neighborhood who one of her relatives was put into an asylum for a while because she had mental health problems. And back then, it wasn't considered shameful for her to go there, and it wasn't considered like there was something, she had done something wrong. It wasn't a disgrace or scandalous with the family. They just understood that she had an illness that was mental, not physical. She needed help. She got that help, and then she came back to be with the rest of the family. As opposed to now, where we see point out mental health as it's almost in our society, it's a superpower. If you are mentally ill, you are able to do things that normal people will not do because it's beneath their dignity as a human being, or they're not willing to engage in that kind of stuff because of just how it is.
Yeah.
Now, some mental health problems are indeed, I'd say, I don't want to say necessarily criminal, but they're just not appropriate. Like it's behavior that you should not tolerate in a society.
Well, it's interesting because if you go back historically, TJ, or first of all, the word asylum comes from, well, two places, Greek, and that means a place safe from seizure. And then the Roman version of that, the Latin, you've got a place that is safe from violence, a place that where you cannot, you're safe. It's a safe place. So that's the origin of the word there. Now, if you go back historically and you look at these places, they were, you could, if you go back and look at the records of admission, so, going back 200-300 years, you could be placed in an asylum for excessive masturbation. You could be placed in an asylum for having anxiety. You could be placed in an asylum if you're a woman, if you skipped your menstrual cycle. You could be placed in an asylum if there was one entry that had overeating peppermint candy, obsessive eating of peppermint candy. So you can see, what the cultural shift of knowing where things come from. Because back in Ireland, if you were severely mentally ill, you were kept in a hole under your family's cottage until you died. You were chained around the neck and warehoused and left there for 20 plus years until you died.
Right.
So there was a woman on Blackwell Island. It was an insane asylum for women. It was 147 acres in the East River, and it was specifically for women. The living conditions and how they were treated were horrendous. The journalist Nellie Bly had herself committed there, ostensibly for about a week. But she couldn't get out. Her editor finally said, well, where the fuck are you? And had to get rid of habeas corpus and send a lawyer over there to extract her. But the shit that she wrote about, it was horrendous. There was a woman who was in a straitjacket in a solitary room who gave birth in a straitjacket. It's insane. It's literally insane.
Right. And I think that gets at the heart of because we've just been talking about the purposes of mental asylums. And now we're getting at why many of them were closed, because they were engaging in behavior that was, this is why the importance of culture matters, because that, someone would say, define mentally ill.
Well, that's another point. My psych professor always said that you will go mad according to your culture, and madness is downstream from culture. Case in point, and I may have mentioned this before. Have you heard the term to run amok? You may have heard that. Oh, he ran amok. Well, that comes from Papua New Guinea and was specific to that area, the mental illness where you just lose your fucking shit and run screaming through the village for no apparent reason. We don't for the most part, we don't do that here. At least, well, I mean, at least not
I'd
not
say
publicly.
that I think that with the whole purpose of mental asylums is that their purpose should be to kind of skip ahead to the end of getting to the point for that we can later explore, is that mental asylums, there are people who should be, I hate to say this, and I know that all my liberty loving peoples out there will find this repugnant, but I'm going to defend this point later on. People who are mentally ill, even if you're not violent, even if you're not a physical threat to someone else, there are people out there who are mentally ill who should be forcibly incarcerated. And there's a couple of reasons for that. But if we're going to make the argument now, I would just make it on the fact that, well, this person gets to vote. Yeah. So as long as we live in a democracy where mentally ill people's votes counts as much as mine, then I don't want to, like, I have special rights to, and then they say, well, who gets to decide what's mentally ill? Well, dude, you're getting to the point of why culture matters, why basic values, basic beliefs about reality and the world matter. This is why this whole nonsense about multiculturalism and we're accepting to everybody. Now you have a society in which nobody can agree on anything, and that's how you result in having mentally ill people being praised as these demigods, whereas normal healthy people end up going crazy. And in fact, the other thing that was interesting is with the Soviet Union, one of the things that they would do with political dissidents is classify them as being mentally ill, and they would put them in mental asylums.
Well, it's funny you say that. It's funny you say that as well. Going back in history, if the husband had his reputation to maintain in the community, and his wife was doing some weird shit. Case in point, there was one woman who was getting into spiritualism, and her husband was a minister or some shit, and he thought, no, you're not ruining this. So he paid off 2 doctors to have her committed. There's that, because there were no regulations.
Right, and I'm not saying, that there's not room for abuse, and this is the problem, I guess, the challenge with this whole thing. Mm-hmm. But what you have now is where instead of these people being forcibly incarcerated, they end up on the street as homeless people. This is where I have zero tolerance anymore for the low IQ, short-term thinking of, well, we can't lock them up. Okay, instead of being in a place where they're being fed, they're being kept warm, they're not freezing to death, they're
getting care.
They're getting
what they need.
Well, let's assume for a second that a mental patient is in an asylum that is not treating them well. Great. Let's compare that to the odds of their survival as a homeless person on the street. Their odds of being killed or dying of the elements or dying of addiction. There's some people. Roman actually wrote about this in a recent blog post about how some people don't have free will. That's a very painful realization, but it's true. There's some people who you have to control them for their own good. I know that's like, who gets to decide that, and all the philosophical, ethical questions I don't have the answers to. I just know that there's some people who, when they are being controlled by other people, the result is better. If somebody is forcibly incarcerated because they're mentally ill, they are better off than when they're on the street dying of a drug addiction or they're murdered by someone else. So this is where we have to change our attitude in our society, where certain people, like, we got to get rid of this egalitarian mindset where some people, everybody's the same, everybody's equal. No, some people, I'm not saying in equality before the law, and I'm not even saying in a spiritual sense that they're like inferior of worth. There's some people who are better than other people. They should be running society. They should be running society because of their capacity to handle the responsibilities and the authorities that come with running society. How that looks, I don't know, but I know what it looks like when you don't do that. We have our society today where mentally ill people in mass get to set policy, and those policies are insane. Those policies make no sense to an average person. The only reason they're enforced is through sheer violence.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I want just to weigh in on what we've been talking about too. So before I continue.
Well, just from a sheer numbers perspective, I mean, we were talking about where do these people need to be and how do they get there and where do they need to go? Well, I mean, the numbers bear it out pretty well. Most of the hospitals or, institutions themselves were shut down between the mid 50s and the mid 90s. About 500,000 patients were discharged from state hospitals during that time. And as of 1994, there were only about 72,000 total patients that were institutionalized. Mm-hmm. And that number's actually gone down since then. The states closed their hospitals. They simply cut their budgets completely. And that reduced the availability of any inpatient care facilities because there was no place to put them. And beds with psychiatric wards were also reduced because of the funding. So by about 2010, there were less than 50,000 psychiatric beds available nationwide for an entire population. That equates to about 14 psychiatric beds for every 100,000 people. That's not enough psychiatric beds for Twitter, let alone,
Seriously.
So, 3.5 million of the severely mentally ill don't receive any psychiatric treatment at all. That statistic comes straight from the Institute of Health here in the U.S. Over 200,000 of those suffer from schizophrenia, another 100,000 from depression, and another 150,000 from bipolar disorder, and then about 70% of all of those people are homeless. So 1/3 of the total homeless population is thought to be mentally ill at one time or another. 10% are veterans who have actually served in foreign wars and suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and other war-related injuries. So where do you end up putting these people? Well, the answer is pretty simple. They fuck up, they go to jail. So more than 350,000 of these people are in jails and prisons serving humongous sentences. 16% of all inmates are severely mentally ill. We're not talking, your basic depression. We're talking about schizophrenia, schizoid affective disorders, sociopathy, psychopathy, the big ones, as Mr. Trump would say, the big ones. There are almost 10 times as many mentally ill people in jails than there are in the hospitals. Because there aren't any hospitals. That's a horrible statistic. And, you can get to the causes. And some people like to say, well, part of the reason why they're not institutionalized is because we've come up with outpatient treatments and psychiatric drugs between the mid-50s and the mid-90s to, help mitigate this. And I would have to say that all that does is show that there are actually more mentally ill people than are reported. Because if you look at the total number of users of antidepressants and you look at it by age and population,
exactly.
Women over the age of 40, almost 45% of them are all on antidepressants.
Yeah. When I worked at a drink mental health crisis house, that was one of these smaller community-based, sort of a halfway house. It was a transition from the mental asylum or psychiatric hospital to the house with 6 beds, and then back into the community. And all 90% of them were duly diagnosed. So what does that mean? No, they have a mental illness, a clinical mental illness, and they're on some kind of third-party drug. They're drug addicts. So they're essentially self-medicating themselves, and that's a huge thing with mental illness. Now, I keep bringing this back to history because it's really important. 2 major things happened to kick all this off, and just touched on it a little bit too, in back in the 50s and 60s. John F. Kennedy's sister, Rosemary, when she was being born, the doctor who was supposed to deliver her was running late. So her nurse is like, "Oh fuck, Mrs. Kennedy, close your legs. You can't have the baby yet. Close your legs. When the baby started to crown and her head was coming out, she forcibly pushed the baby back up to wait for the doctor. The baby lost oxygen, so Rosemary, who later grew up to be a very beautiful young woman, had issues. She couldn't hardly feed herself. She could hardly walk and couldn't really talk. And through some therapy, she did. Well, in 1949, there was a doctor in Portugal that came up with a technique that we all know is prefrontal lobotomy to handle like what was called unitary psychosis. It was an umbrella of it tried to handle everything because they didn't know. Like, let's do this. It seems to work. What it basically did was it turned you into a zombie that was incontinent. So they performed this operation on Kennedy's sister, fucked her up. So a lot of things in history are because certain people in power have axes to grind. The first axe to grind was Kennedy. He's like, you're out of your fucking minds. I wasn't consulted in this, and you did this to my sister. Fuck you. So he started looking into the mental health community, and he signed into the Mental Community Health Act in 1963. And that basically came about because in World War II, the treatment of, I forget the word at the time, but it would equate to post-traumatic stress disorder. They would treat the soldiers. They would give them therapy in locations directly behind enemy lines, so they were close to the action, so you could still hear what was going on, see what was going on, and be in the action without being removed from it. And they knew that their buddies were nearby. And then after some therapy, back into battle, and that worked. So Kennedy's like, wow, well, let's do that here. Let's get the people out of these institutions, but into they wanted to get them back into the community in a safe, healthy manner. Funneled money into it. Well, they didn't get embedded back into the community. Where did that money go? It always comes down to money. Nobody gives a shit about mental health. They care about the money. So fast forward 2 years with Lyndon B. Johnson. What does he do? Medicare and Medicaid Act was in 1965. One of the provisions in that act were to place mental health under the auspices of the federal government. Now there was an exclusion. There was institution mental I am something. And what that said was, we're not going to fund any mental health facility that has over 16 beds. You're not getting any fucking money. All right, well, that takes care of all the institutionalized...
Ladies and gentlemen, the federal government's logic and why they shouldn't be trusted to run the Vienna Boys choir.
Exactly. So now let's fast forward to 1972. A Stanford doctor and 7 other of his students, David Rosenhain. He had an axe to grind. I haven't figured out through study what his axe was yet, but he embedded himself and these other 7 pseudo patients into different asylums around the United States to find out, because anything with mental health is it's like, well, we don't know really how that works. We can't quantify it. We can't see, oh, look, there's mental health in your brain that's causing the problem. So let's isolate that. We don't know how to do that. So he wanted to find out what was going on in these places and publish a paper in Science journal or magazine or what have you. Well, he did. What he did, he conflated, he completely ruined his numbers, lied, fabricated shit. So
of course,
between that and what was already happening, it completely took the head off of the snake, as it were. It completely decimated and destroyed the credibility that the mental asylums had at that time. These psychiatric units, completely gone. So this is where we're at. This is where we're at, because the nation wanted to know, like, what the fuck is really going on? What's going on? So
right. So one thing.
I'm sorry, TJ. Go ahead.
Oh, the one thing I wanted to say is that as far as like the mental illness stuff, is that I think the problem became more pronounced. I'm of the opinion that World War I, in so many ways, was one of the worst things. It was delivered a death blow to Western civilization. One of the reasons that is the case is that you had a new form of warfare that produced psychological problems that really did not exist in prior warfare. And I'm not arguing, and nobody's arguing, that warfare was not brutal in prior years, like Civil War and whatever. But the manner in which it occurred is easier for the human psyche to process, where the battles were sudden, they were during known times, and then it was over, and then you withdrew and the battle was over. In World War I, it was continuous warfare, so it produced PTSD. Well, they come back into a society, and that society does not know how to accommodate or deal with their mental illness. On top of that, you had World War II. There was that book Unforgiven about that famous track star who later was in the Pacific, and the author's going through all these different men who came back from the Pacific having been suffered from these atrocities, and they're broken people. Well, guess what? Those men got married and had families, and that trauma got passed on to their family. And the sick, like when you realize mental illness, this is two important points that I want people to keep in mind while listening to this. Mental illness is as much of an illness as a virus or disease like tuberculosis, and it is just as infectious. It can pass, a person can pass their mental illness onto someone else by proximity or by whatever you want to call it. But a parent, if you have a mentally ill parent, they're going to pass on some of that trauma or that mental illness onto their children, even if their children weren't genetically predisposed to it, just by exposure to that, because they're forced to operate in that environment. And so I think that that's part of what built up to the point where we have what we see in today's society. The common individual looks at a mentally ill person and wants to enable their behavior rather than protect them. Like when I hear someone say that we can't be cruel to people, like homeless people, we can't take them off the street, we can't tell them what to do, I automatically know that that person is suffering from a mental illness, because they are identifying with someone who is mentally ill within the context of a discussion having to do with mental illness. This is a very good way to tell when you're talking to somebody whether they're mentally ill. You talk about someone who's dealing with a mental illness, and you talk about the right prescription for how to deal with them. And if they immediately defend their autonomy to be able to continue being mentally ill in whatever context they want, you know that that person is identifying with them for a reason. And that reason is because they see themselves in that person. They see a mental illness in them, and they may not be homeless and on the street, but that's probably why they feel guilty. Like, how can I judge them when I'm guilty of the same mental illness, but here I am in a nice home in Seattle, I'm working at Amazon or Microsoft, and I'm wealthy, and that other mentally ill person ends up on the street. I mean, this is why I think that that's part of the problem, is the wealthy and the privileged and the elite class is just as mentally ill and broken, but their mental illness doesn't prevent them from gaining wealth. Whereas some people's mental illness means they're on the street and incapable of doing basic stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. To bring back around the point of PTSD, a far funnier person than me gave one of the best descriptions of our mental health system by looking at the euphemisms that pertain to PTSD. George Carlin does about a 10-minute skit where he describes how people coming back from World War I suffered from shell shock. Okay, makes it sound very serious that your illness is caused directly by your direct contact with combat. And that having things exploding around you, shells, have shocked you into some type of stupor, which brings a visceral connection to, what you've experienced, to the behaviors that you're exhibiting now. And then once World War II came around, it turned into, combat fatigue. Okay, well, where you've been made tired by constant barrage of battle or fighting over a period of time. And then it later moved on to the Vietnam conflict, where it was, battle blues, they would call it, even just lame shit like that to kind of segregate
battle fatigue.
Battle fatigue.
Right. And then finally now we give it this humongously long, esoteric definition, post-traumatic stress disorder.
It's completely sanitized.
Of course,
Well,
but what it also
yeah.
does too is it allows you to umbrella it under things like being called the wrong fucking pronoun. Instead of the severity of what it should have been to begin with. It was linked directly to people fighting in war, not fighting the culture war, or feeling offended, or not getting a cookie at the end of class when you were 3. That's part of the reason why we treat mental illness with such frivolity, I guess would be the best way to describe it. We don't take it seriously. These are not serious people doing serious things and being serious about a serious issue. This is and one of the reasons why is that we've created a language and we've permitted people to victimize themselves under very large, very serious rubrics without serious problems and without a real diagnosis for a lot of times. 90% of this stuff is self-diagnosis. And what then it allows is everyone to downplay real illness because, my buddy is bi and trans and she suffers from PTSD because of something that happened her sophomore year in college or whatever. Fuck off.
Right.
You completely ruin what should be focused on a true illness by making it trivial enough to loop it into angst or some problems that you might be having in your life that's completely unrelated to something as serious.
Momentary contextual anxiety is now is under the umbrella of mental health.
Well, and the one thing I want to throw out there for this, just for context, is at the same time I think that there's, I don't want to say mental illness, but there's traumas that are can be just as debilitating for a human being. And I'm going to go back to that example of that elderly neighbor that I have, where she was describing this relative who had mental illness, and there was this instance where she was having to watch over her. This was a middle-aged woman, and she somehow had gotten a gun from the house and was just sitting next to it, and the man of the husband came and found her with the gun and took it and whatever. But it was conveyed to my neighbor as a young child that nothing that was happening was her fault. She wasn't blamed for the fact that this older woman had gotten the gun, that she might have killed herself. They don't know. And so I was explaining to her, I go, imagine if you had been blamed as a child for all this stuff. And then instead of acknowledging that this older woman was mentally ill, everybody said it was your fault that she was behaving this way. Imagine how much that would have affected your psychology. And she understood that, but I think that's the difference between today and maybe back then, is that now when mentally ill people act out, the blame is placed on sane people, like projection and gaslighting. And then those people deal with maybe not mental illness, but they deal with the trauma, especially when they're not able to escape that environment. When you've got people where I think the worst is it starts when they're kids, because they can't escape that environment. So if you have a mentally ill parent, who's a borderline personality disorder or severely narcissistic, they can project their mental illness and blame all of their problems of their mental illness onto a child who can't escape that environment. And that's how it gets perpetuated, because then that sane person, they may not be mentally ill, but they've got trauma. And because it wasn't in a military context, it's not considered to be the same, but it can be just as debilitating as a society. And then they start to identify with people who've also, that's just how it spreads. And that's why you quarantine people. Goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. This is why you quarantine people who are mentally ill. They will hurt people, innocent kids who are under their care. They don't have a right to do that. And I don't care what somebody says about their civil rights and whatever when it comes to something like that. A society that violates their civil rights will last longer than one that doesn't. And you know what? They're going to violate your civil rights. Look what's going on right now. We're basically destroying our civil liberties over the paranoias of the mentally ill over a virus with a 99% survival rate. This is the act.
Yeah.
This is the en masse act of mentally ill people when there's enough mentally ill people in the country. Because this would not have passed 20 years ago. There just
enough
weren't enough
mentally ill people that are in power like that. What's that public health? If you have public health official next to your name, you know what? You're pissed off because you couldn't become a doctor. You're a huge fucking loser. Sorry. That one from Pennsylvania that's a half man, half woman. Bullshit. What the fuck is that?
Yeah, look at all the secretaries of health. They're all these fat asses.
Yeah,
these androgynous nightmares. It's like it reminds me of that meme where it showed all the Secretary of Defenses of like the European nations, and it's all these like little tiny women, and then they show the one from Russia, and it looks like this Siberian looking like
it's like this huge man that crush your fucking head with his hand.
It just says, which one would you trust with your country's defense? It's like, yeah, I don't want to be lectured to.
It goes back to what Jess was saying about egalitarian equalism with the both, or even you, teacher, were saying everyone's the same. So if everyone's the same, it shouldn't matter who is. No, we're not. We're not all the fucking same, and it's clear by looking at and just listening to these people that there's something. There's like the cheese slid off your cracker a long time ago. Okay, you're a few sandwiches short of a picnic, and you are making decisions for us. Go fuck yourself. No.
Well, and so the people were wondering, well, what is the call to action? What is the thing they can do? The only thing we can do, because we're not in power. We are the same minority. The only thing you can do is use rhetoric to inflict so much emotional pain that they will not continue with it. So I've come up with all these ways. Like if I was to ever be confronted by somebody who says, "Why aren't you wearing a mask?" I have a variety of different rhetorical responses that inflict so much emotional pain on them as a mentally ill person that they're going to leave me alone. They're not going to want to continue with this discussion. That's all we've got. Because if I can't lock them up in an asylum, I can at least keep them away from me. I can ensure that I have social distancing between me and the mentally ill. Like that's all we can do.
Yeah.
But I think that the other thing that is what I'm convinced of, is that there was a generation that was dealing with trauma. They chose to turn a blind eye to it or not deal with it. And that trauma
not only that, what it comes down to, and I mentioned this earlier, there's no money in it. The blind eye, the eye is connected to the body that is greedy and wants their take. There's like when I mentioned that journalist Noe Bly going to Blackwell Island, she published her findings. It's like, oh holy shit, nobody gave a shit. Nobody did anything. At the time, New York City, one of the most wealthy cities in the world, and cosmopolitan, and you'd figure, oh, they would do something. They didn't do anything. They did absolutely nothing. So why? Because there's no money in it. Nobody fucking cares. Well,
and you also reach a critical mass where there's so many mentally ill people in the population that they identify with the problem, because they may not be the direct cause of the problem, but this is the only way to explain what's going on in Seattle, where you have the mentally ill are able to basically take over these parks. They're able to basically take over all these public spaces, and people's response is, we need to have free heroin and sites for these people. That's the only thing that that is the response.
We need to get them off the street in a humane way.
No, but because they identify with the mentally ill on that, the idea of restricting that person's freedom is intolerable. So they project the problem onto ordinary citizens, where if you're a tax-paying, law-abiding citizen who goes about your business and doesn't do any problem, you are evil. You're the cause of everything that's wrong in the world.
You're the
you
problem.
Just need to die. Right. And that's why, I hate to say it, but guys, this is why Seattle as a city is going to collapse. This is why every urban area that embraces this nonsense is going to collapse. This is also a problem with democracy when you have someone who's mentally ill coming into your neighborhood. If somebody were to move into my neighborhood today and say that they're from Seattle, I would start interrogating them on the spot. No, I'm not joking.
I believe you.
I would say, why are you here? Who'd you vote for? And if you voted for that, why are you not over there right now? And they go, well, because of all the crap. It's like, you voted for that. And then I just say, look, guys, look, dude, I don't know who you are, but based on what you're saying, you're a problem. I don't want any more people like you here. You're not welcome, and I'm not going to talk to you. No, they have to, like, this is where it's at. It's the only thing we have is you are not welcome. Like, I'm not saying I'm going to run you out of your house. I'm just saying I will not speak to you or associate with you, and I'm going to be very unfriendly if I ever see you, because that's what's going to take. Unless you renounce your Seattle privilege, right? And you admit your complicity in this whole farce, and you repent, right? And we can even do the whole cleansing ceremony, right? Like, you cleanse yourself of your Seattle-iteness. Otherwise, it's going to spread.
We basically waterboard you for a week.
the 2020 version of baptism, right?
Exactly. Yeah, the waterboarding. And we got to cleanse you of your Seattle-ness. No,
yeah, but
you're
you're
absolutely correct.
Yeah,
you're absolutely correct.
The only way to deal with these people is to make them be uncomfortable, because they're used to making other people feel uncomfortable for believing what they believe. They are not used to dealing with people saying, no, you're mentally ill, you're dangerous, you're a threat to our...
you're a mental retard, you get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah, I just say to them, I think you're mentally ill. I think you're a threat to the public safety of this place. I would encourage everyone here to not associate with you and to ostracize you, and hopefully you'll sell your house and go to a place where the politics reflect your values, which is a dumpster fire.
Yeah, well, it's something. Chess brought up George Carlin. Chess, you remember that one skit he did where he said, we need to take one state that's bordered by all other states, like, I don't know, it's whatever, Utah or something, and wall it off, and then put all the mentally ill fucktards in it and let them have at it.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
It's almost like was it the Japanese manga was Battle Royale, and then they did the Hunger Games stupid remake here in the U.S. But yeah, just let them fight it out and find out who's the king of the mentally ill at the very end. Yeah,
there you go.
I think a large part of it too is that when you take away the ability to treat inpatient, you're simply saying that the only way to treat everything is outpatient, and that shouldn't be. The seriously mentally ill, like a lot of these people who are homeless and on the street, they're hearing other voices telling them things to do other than just their own, and they're not well. When you have cities that would rather deal with the problem by giving you an application on your phone telling you where to avoid stepping in human shit, as opposed to dealing with the problem of homelessness. San Francisco, you can go fuck yourself. I mean, that's just the worst. That's the worst. I mean, it's basically just ignoring people and saying that you're doing good for them by allowing them to exist out in the open. I don't want to mess with their autonomy. They should be able to do what they want. Well, yes, but you're not helping them. So how much would it cost to help? Well, that's not up to us to find out, because I live in a high rise over here. I live in a $4,500 a month brownstone in my neighborhood, and that's just not something I want to look at. I'd rather just talk about it and virtue signal rather than deal with the actual problem. And it is, I think it's a mental illness of believing that public policy and empathy should be mixed in some way as well. I don't believe the two should necessarily come into contact with one another, because you're not basing one on the other. You're not equating one to the other when you're forming public policy. You need to be much more rational than that. And I think that that's where a lot of this goes awry, is that we think we can cure all of society's woes with more regulation and more taxing. Yeah. And I don't think that's possible.
No,
right.
No, that's true.
Another thing I wanted to add, JD in the comments made a really great point, and I totally agree with him. And I've long thought about this. He said that mental illness is an extreme form of immaturity, and I would say that it's actually because I've seen this. I've literally seen adults with power reduced to a childlike state. where they're all but I'm not. People think I'm crazy when I say this. They're all but stomping their feet and saying, like, from if you've seen the Lego Batman movie where Batman goes, "No, Alfred, I don't want to do this. No," and he just starts throwing a temper tantrum. Like, I've literally seen adults act like that, and the reason is because they don't have to behave like an adult. They're in charge. They have power. They have control. You can't. And what's crazy is then you that turn to the other adults in the room thinking they're going to point out that behavior. Instead, they start talking to them like children. Like you see. I've seen full-grown men talking to each other like they are preschoolers. It's some of the most surreal experiences I've ever seen in my life on this topic, or on this issue. But it made me realize, like, being immature is a form of a superpower in our society. Because what if you can't here? This is where I'm going to get in a little bit of trouble, maybe. But if you can't punch someone in the face and they have no shame, you are severely limited in how you can deal with them, because they'll just do or say whatever it takes. They'll pretend like they don't understand you. Like, what is it called? Fake ignorance, where they pretend like they don't understand what you're saying, so that you can't have an argument over what you're trying to make, what point you're trying to make.
Yeah, well, and Bacon
You know what I mean?
says, makes a comment about mental illness being something someone is born with, but most of it is a result of childhood abuse. That's I'm going to disagree with you there. It's the two don't equate, not always. I'm not saying you can't have some kind of illness
Right.
from childhood trauma, but that's all mental illness is not from childhood trauma.
Well, and I would say that it's not really, I would argue from a policy perspective, it doesn't really matter what caused it. What matters is a person better off being quarantined from the rest of society, getting treatment, and then you decide, is this a person who is capable of being reintroduced to society? Because there are people, for example, Jean Turney was a famous actress from the 40s and 50s. She had mental illness. Her mental illness did not affect anyone other than her, for the most part. And people understood that there was something wrong, and she understood there was something wrong with her. She had these moments where she's like, I need help. And she tried to get help and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think that she caused trauma to anyone around her, because she wasn't, I don't think, blaming. I don't know. Maybe I'm sugarcoating some of
that's part of the problem of mental illness is, one, how you define it, and at what point. What it comes down to is, at what point does it interfere with your daily means to exist and interact with other people without hurting yourself and others? So that's the crux of the problem.
Another thing I'll throw out there is there's various forms of mental illness. There are some people who have mild illnesses, and they just you account for that. Maybe they shouldn't be quarantined. Maybe they shouldn't be in an insane asylum. Because they're not a threat, and they're just quirky. Like, there's some people, this is where people who edge on the side of caution, I understand, because there are some weird people out there that I know and I've encountered. They're just very eccentric. They're quirky people. Yeah. But in our society today, we would consider them people. I wouldn't, but other people would consider them insane. But I just understand.
Well, like 30, 40 years ago, yeah, exactly. They'd be like a candidate for the rubber room, as it were. Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of stories I heard from people when I was younger, where there was like basically like old men who are just very eccentric, that today they would be seen as because of just who they are. They're just weird, and our society doesn't understand those men. They're not creepy or dangerous. They're just odd. They just have weird quirks, as opposed to today where, yeah.
Well, the problem is it's how comfortable you feel around these people as well, and that's a yardstick by which people measure their whether or not they want people around them, is their comfort level.
Well, and here's another danger of our society when you have mentally ill people as a huge chunk of the population, is that if you have a mentally ill person accuse you falsely of a crime, and they engage in hysterics, then you are in big trouble. And I'm not, again, I'm going to just throw this out there. I'm not a big fan of Brett Kavanaugh, the Supreme Court justice. I don't think he should have been appointed for my own personal political reasons. But the witch hunt against him was one of the greatest examples of mental illness I've ever seen.
Yeah, that was literally insane.
So I was watching this and just thought, this is one of the most hysterical things I've ever seen. And it's over a candidate whose politics are very. This is what kind of made it insane. His politics weren't even that extreme. He was a guy who wrote the Patriot, or he was involved with the Patriot Act. He was a kind of just a mainstream constitutional type guy, but something just snapped in people, and they said he was doing like gang rape parties, and he was doing all this crazy stuff and just making things up from 30 years ago. But the problem is the woman who accused him was insane, I would assume, and a ton of women out there and men saw in her the same mental illness as themselves, and to condemn her or reject or criticize her or disagree with her would be to go against themselves. And so this is why we saw this mass hysteria, especially with women. And to just throw this out there, look up the origins of the word hysteria. The Greeks didn't know what caused hysteria, but they know which gender it came from primarily.
And in what body part it resided, yes.
Yes.
They were really on the ball, those Greeks.
Like, there's a reason why a hysterectomy and a hysteria have similar sounds.
That's funny. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, remove the uterus, remove the crazy. It was pretty much the thing that, yep.
Yeah, imagine like some of these. I'm gonna just throw another thing out there. You in today's society, you're a man and you get married to a woman who's mentally ill. That does stuff to the guy. I'm not saying that. How can I put this? I'm not saying that. I think that here's the thing. I'm gonna get in trouble possibly from some people for saying this, but I don't think sane, healthy, psychologically healthy women get involved with psychologically mentally ill men. I think that they may find them attractive in some way, kind of like how we find certain women attractive, but we understand they're crazy and we don't get involved with them. Whereas maybe I'm painting with too broad of a brush, but it causes trauma to them as well to be in a relationship with that kind of person. I just see a lot of guys who look like they just, returned from the trenches of World War I. You're just after they've been married for a couple of years. And I'm not saying that's all marriages, but I think that that's the result of men marrying women that everyone else says is fine. But if you actually look at her behavior, there's red flags. There's more red flags than a Bernie Sanders rally.
Yeah. The old adage, don't stick your dick in crazy, I mean, is an adage for a reason. I mean, you just don't, you just try to avoid people who are the worst is brought out in them by you for whatever reason. If you remind them of a parent or an ex that may have wronged them in some way growing up, or if simply you are unprepared to be around a person who doesn't have, basic standards of morality and living decently. And you are either intrigued by it because it's polarly different than what you're used to and you accept the challenge, which is dumb. Or you've simply just made the decision that this is the best I can do. And I think that's an even worse position to take, is that you're willing to settle for something that's harmful for you simply because you don't want to be alone.
Well, and I'd say that also with the men, they're not prepared. I'm not sure what causes it, and I can only speculate, but I think part of it is they see the red flags and they have like cold feet, but often what happens is society reassures them that what they're seeing is actually not a problem. Like their friends,
because only women can trust their instincts, TJ. They're magical creatures.
Right.
Men,
What did I?
men,
What did I miss? Magical creatures? What's going on? Unicorns? Unicorns? What's going on?
no,
We were talking about.
Yeah, we're just discussing the fact that
Vaginas?
a lot of times, yes, when men get into relationships with women, they after a year they end up looking as though they suffer from contact fatigue, as opposed to
They let
what they
themselves do. Yeah.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the mental illness of the other person, or it's just that that person brings out the worst in you, or you would rather be with something abusive than be alone. And that's part of the issue too, is that you just don't have the abundance mentality to say, hey man, I'm done with this. this is just off the rocker for me. Getting laid regularly is not that important compared to my own mental health and safety.
Absolutely.
Right. And the funny thing is also the idea that the sex life that they're experiencing is going to continue after the marriage is complete nonsense. It's going to go with borderlines. With borderline,
this is a priest talking about giving a sex talk. TJ, I don't know.
I'm just. Dude, I'm just saying, like with borderline. I've never been married to a borderline. I've heard stories from the horse's mouth about this stuff. So that's, I guess,
it depends on the man you're talking to. You have to take that into account. Always consider the source.
That is true.
Yeah.
Men, a lot of times men eventually put a lot of cock blockers into their lives, either intentionally or unintentionally. Makes frequency and availability and ease of access a lot different than it was when you were, just getting together with some chick. When you get kids and mortgages and other stuff that gets in the way, you can't just lay around for 4 days straight in bed like you used to when you first met the girl. So it is what it is.
Yep. Safety doc. Put this up here. I've read Viktor Frankl's work. That's one of the things that the asylum struggled to address was agency and purpose, even for mentally ill people, and that was important because a lot of these, even to this day, mental asylums, mental health hospitals now, they're like these little self-contained cities, underground tunnels connecting different portions and administration buildings. They had farms, they had places to work and play. Bowling alleys, theaters. The patients had jobs. They had and Aaron would love this. They had itineraries. They followed a regimen of work and play and diet and exercise. And this is where the sanatorium and the sanitarium came into play too. And the health cure for patients with tuberculosis is getting them outside, getting them working, fresh air and sunlight. Now, is that going to cure mental illness? No, but that sense of purpose, that sense of agency is very, very important, even for someone who has a mental illness.
Right.
Obviously, there's some that are strict that can't even function, and that's where sort of a warehousing policy comes in, a humane warehousing policy comes into effect, because they can hurt themselves if they're left to their own devices.
Well, again, it goes down to like what level of mental illness. If they're dealing with like issues of severe anxiety, or they're dealing with learned helplessness, or they're dealing with other things that just make it impossible for them to function in society, but they're not ill-intended and they're not causing harm to other people, but they do need help, then that can actually be a huge boost for their mental health to be out just doing stuff. I do want to throw out, it just occurred to me, a great film that addresses some of the stuff that I've made is the movie Silver Linings Playbook. I never read the book, but the film,
the author, I know the author, he's a dick.
Right. Well, I never read the book, but I watched the movie, and what was funny about the film is that it's about a guy who just got back out of a mental hospital. And as you're watching this movie, you realize that he's perhaps one of the more normal people in the entire film in terms of like his psychological state. Most of the other people.
Go back and read the book. Go back and read the book. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I'm watching the movie. I don't know if this was the intent of the movie, but I'm just watching. I'm like, holy crap! His dad is even crazier than he is. His best friend is like, smashing stuff in his garage, listening to heavy metal, and like, talking about how he's losing his mind, and all these other people are doing stuff, and I was like, okay, like I understand the main character's got problems, but like everybody else around them has problems too, yet they pretend like only the main character and perhaps Tiffany,
He
female.
caught his wife cheating with the athletic
Right.
instructor. So that it wasn't really mental illness so much. It was as in the moment spontaneous decision to do something fucking stupid.
Right. And
So,
what's funny is he talks about how like his dad got in so many fights, he got banned from the Philadelphia football stadium. And what's funny is if you watch the film, his dad is like completely OCD. He's got the controllers have to be pointed towards a certain direction.
Yeah.
You got to be holding the handkerchief. You got to have the juju, and he's just like, it's incredibly superstitious.
It's completely
stuff
backwards. Yeah.
Well, what's funny is like he says so much screwed up stuff to his son, Pat, in this film, and I'm like, how is this dude not lying? Nobody says anything. It's like it's completely like, oh well, that's just his dad. And I was like, and I'm watching and I'm thinking, what kind of message does this send about society? Is that I think that I'm not saying that that Pat and Tiffany didn't need help, or problems, but like everyone else around them had problems that were perhaps even worse or something like that.
Mm-hmm. You're the new guy, TJ. You're the old new guy. He's best lying.
I said
homeschooled been following us for a while. He knows.
Yeah, I know. That's why I was like, he's jerking my shit. Yeah,
that's right.
I totally agree with Doc's point that the whole automation thing of everything is going to. All the people who are going to come out and say, "Well, look how it's lifted us out of poverty and it's how it's raised our standard of living." Yeah, but you know what? How agency and purpose provides greater happiness than luxury and leisure.
Yeah,
luxury, leisure, and safety do not provide as much as agency and purpose. I think that this is why there wasn't as much mental illness, especially among the political class. I think that the political class has always had a certain brand of personalities and archetypes. Obviously, people who are ambitious, but I don't think that mentally ill people have been in power in prior societies the way that they are now, or psychopaths or sociopaths. I just don't think so. And because you look at some of the stuff that people were able to accomplish back in the day, they were competent people, as opposed to today. You have mentally ill people running a country that is that is a good chunk of it mentally ill. None of these idiots, none of these
well, it goes back to something you said too. And mental illness back then, there was a bit of a stigma to it. It wasn't something to be proud of. I mean, you weren't going to get bullied for it, but at the same time, it wasn't something that you put on your resume or wore emblazoned on your shirt. It was something it was something to go through with quiet dignity.
Well, that you're not going to get elected to politics, and that's kind of the point. Like when you read about some of these generals or these people during parts of history that I've been reading, people could debate whether they were good people or moral people, whether they were good leaders or bad leaders. You cannot argue against their like the genius, like their intelligence levels were off the charts. Especially with some of the founding fathers. Like we're talking about the Constitutional Convention of the United States probably had the smartest people in one room that perhaps ever existed. And I'm not trying to like, I know it's my country and all that kind of stuff, but like, and I'm not talking about just IQ, but people who are able to deal with stuff in a very intelligent manner and competent manner.
They got shit done no matter what. Yeah,
they got stuff done. Whereas opposed to now, we can't even fill potholes. Cities fall apart, and they talk about how white supremacy is a mental health crisis, while they encourage 14-year-old boys to get buggered. Like
what?
like So this happened.
What? That took a weird turn. What?
Well, no. So I'm gonna give an example. So in my state, they voted this at the beginning of this year to decriminalize infecting someone with HIV. As part of that, they said that 14-year-old boys can get treatment for HIV without their parents' knowledge or consent. These same people turn around and say that the Wuhan virus is a public health crisis that has to be dealt with. They also say that white supremacy is a public health crisis. So my point is, if you think that, but you think that HIV isn't that big of a deal, and it's not something that a parent should be notified about if their kid, like, do you think 14-year-old boys should be able to get tested for COVID without their parents' permission? Of course they wouldn't say that.
No.
So.
Yep.
Yeah, I actually have thought about this pretty hard in the last few months, and I really think that the major issue is that there is no legal or social penalty for not accepting agency. I believe that that is the main issue. You are not shamed for lacking agency or defending your position. And you are not legally penalized in any way for using that agency to infect others with stupid thought. So what is there then for society to do other than become perpetual victims? Because there is no status in society greater than the person with zero agency when agency itself isn't rewarded, nor is it penalized. So be the person without agency and reap the rewards of an insane society. And it's entirely backwards. It should not be this way. No. The people who have taken responsibility for their own actions should be the ones reaping the greatest rewards, not the people who decide to sit back and do nothing about their own standing in life.
Exactly. No, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. That's very good.
You know, another thing I want to throw out there is somebody was talking about this for years, and I agree with him. I don't agree with him on some stuff, but he was a Fox News columnist or something like that. But he was talking about how the mass shooting in recent years is a result of mental illness. Like the reason why these kids are going into their schools and shooting is because of mental illness. And I'm not saying that, I'm not blaming, how can I put this? I think that the school environment and our society's treatment of masculinity and I'll throw this another thing out there. Emasculating men and making all physical forms of violence verboten will drive men mad, because sometimes men will just want to go punch each other, and afterwards it's not a big deal. You shake hands. I was reading a book about Bill Garnier from Band of Brothers. He talked about growing up in Philly in the 30s. He said they would have a dispute. There'd be some fists drawn. You'd have a fist fight, and then at the end of it, you shook hands. Like, you acknowledged that you both kind of gave it your all, and like there was nothing. He said, like, you didn't think anything of it personally afterwards. Whereas today, we don't allow male aggression to be expressed in a healthy manner, and then it leads to them just losing their minds. So I think that's another form of mental that's not a form where like people are born mentally ill. They're driven to madness. I mean, this is what the whole Joker film was kind of about, is how a ordinary man is driven to madness by his society. Like, the film's true villain, I would argue, is Gotham City in that film. If you guys have seen it, like, if you watch the film, it's like everybody around him, for the most part, are villains. They're not good people. So it's a bad city, and he's merely a product of the environment he's raised in. And I understand the whole idea of people thinking that they are individuals and stuff like that, but it's like being in an environment where there's bad air quality. You are going to be affected by your environment. If there's poor air quality, you're going to have trouble breathing. If there's air pollution, you're going to have health problems. Like, you're not immune to that stuff. And if the culture and society around you is mentally ill or dysfunctional or just broken, it's going to affect you as well. And some people are going to be more susceptible to that than others.
No, that's true. And the problem too is diagnosing this.
I wanted to throw Daniel. Are you talking about the Sky Captain or Sky King? He was the guy at SeaTac who stole a plane and flew it around and did all this cool stuff and then crashed it.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, he basically got driven to madness, from what I understand.
Driven to madness.
Well, he was working a job and basically was kept down, and other people were promoted above him, and he finally just kind of gave up. But yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then, don't the air traffic controllers have the highest suicide rate?
Oh, Danielle says Sky King was the only sane one. Danielle, I gotta agree with you. I think that he,
The commercial pilot. Yeah.
I actually listened to his interactions. He sounded very, very put together. He just, maybe what seems insane in our society is what only sane people do in an insane society. When we see people do things that seem insane, maybe that's the only rational reaction. I'm not saying I'm going to go grab a plane and crash it. I prefer to kind of see where everything's going, and I've got other stuff going on. But he didn't sound like he was mad. He just sounded like he had given up, which is sad.
Yeah. Yeah. I had heard that, Carl, too, that dentists were up there on the suicide rate. Especially if you're staring into people's mouths for 8-9 hours.
That film? Yeah, did you ever see that film In the Army Now? It came out in the early 90s. It was a comedy.
No.
It was like Ali Sheedy or something like that.
No, what's that
the
about?
only reason I know this, it's about these guys who joined the army during like the Persian Gulf War. And the only reason the reason that I brought that to mind is because there's a character in that film who brings up that dentists have the highest suicide rate. Because he's wanting to become an army dentist or something like that. Oh, Pauly Shore, that's right. Bullrush. Bullrush to the rescue. Pauly Shore, yeah, in the Army Now. Yeah, I remember that scene where he says, "Do you know dentists have the highest suicide rate?" I was like, that's the weirdest. Yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't think. So, fucking Pauly Shore. What the fuck happened to that guy? Talking about nuts.
He's still touring.
Well, there's a lot.
He does?
He tours. He still tours.
Oh, shit. That's like Bobcat Goldthwait. He still does that shit, too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Pauly Shore's even got groupies still. I mean, they're bad groupies. They're bad
three of them?
But yeah, they're gross, but he does have groupies. He did a documentary on like his 12 casino tour of the Midwest about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was as pathetic as you think it would be. As far as his crowds were good, and he made decent money, but I mean, he's a 6-figure earner now as opposed to a 7-figure earner. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Now, Boris is right. Pauly Shore is not funny. He's really not. All right, now we're coming up on. We got about 15 minutes left. I want to get into we're talking about the problem. That's nice. What can be done? Now, my thought had been, first of all, a mental asylum or an official sanitarium. I would lean more toward a sanitarium myself, but let's leave the words aside. A facility that is large, like the old mental asylums, and having the health benefits, the mental health benefits, and the work and the itinerary, as it were. It needs to be left out of the hands of government funding, because in the past, a lot of wealthy matrons for their husbands would be raising money. That was sort of like their job. Their social job. They would raise money for these places. It was left up to the private organizations, philanthropists, and people with money that actually, sometimes it was. I'm sure there was some status, like, oh, pat myself on the back, status involved, but they generally cared, and the money came privately. And I think that's one of the issues.
Yeah, I personally believe about half of the money that goes into breast cancer research should go into mental health
Correct.
care and research instead. I mean, it's just a prioritization of giving, because the pool of givers and the pool of philanthropy is out there. It's just that it's been directly allocated to different causes now. I mean, cancer treatments being one, social causes being another. Animals, for some reason, get a lot more money than people do at this point, which I also believe is a form of mental illness.
It's crazy.
Yes, raising the value of pets over any person is.
We spend more money on our pets than some countries do on their GNP.
Yes.
It's fucking insane. No, you're absolutely correct.
I had a client for almost 6 years before she decided to go into something else weird. Who owned a pet bakery, literally baked goods for animals.
A pet bakery?
Yes.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Wow, that's talk about niche.
Yeah, but when you live in a wealthy enough area,
people buy it. Yeah,
damn right. And then if you accessorize with custom collars, jackets, Christmas sweaters and all that crap.
Shit, we're in the wrong industry. we gotta get the mental health for pets and their biscuits and all kinds of fucking shit.
Yeah, dude, if you want, look, if you're a heartless Scrooge, like some people we know who drinks all the rum.
Clary.
I would say that you can make a fortune off of the mentally ill today with pets. You can do the whole pet grooming thing. You can have it where they drop their pets off to do like pet school or babysitting or whatever that you want to call it. The stuff that I've seen here's another form of, like you were saying, Chess, and I'm within the context of being a bachelor, it's important. When you see a member of the opposite sex who is treating a pet or an animal with the same consideration as a human being or a child, guaranteed mental illness.
Well, not only that, but your pull-out game and condom game and all other forms of birth control game had better be on point, because that is a child proxy. That is a child proxy, 100%.
Well, here's the other thing you should understand: the fur baby will take precedent over whatever marital vows you get her to agree to. Her fur baby will come first.
No, this is true.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that in any way, shape, or form. So we're talking about solutions and getting back to funding, and I agree that it should be privatized, definitely, and it should also be done by larger trusts or charities, or set up in such a way as to create continued funding through investment, like they do endowments at universities. There should be sanitarium endowments. You send your $1 million when you die over to the old Kellogg facility in Battle Creek, Michigan, and they, invested in gold and Bitcoin, to provide enough money in the future for, Cornflake Jesus to hand out bowls of cleansing, nutritional supplements or whatever. That's the first thing. And then I also think that there needs to be a revamping of the DSM and how mental illness is classified and diagnosed based on severity, not type of illness. Correct. Because I don't think the type of illness necessarily matters as much compared to the societal impact of the severity of the illness.
It's the degree in severity, because when you study psychology, and if you go there's the illness, and then there's the personality quirk or disorder, or the personality types. So you can be on the same spectrum as, say, like obsessive, but not be full blown clinically obsessive compulsive. So it's the degree and severity that you have to deal with, and you're absolutely correct. Now, I have an interesting, slightly interesting story. I had rented a cabin up in Pond Eddy, New York, and that's up near the border of Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. And I went on, I went on a drive one afternoon, kind of got lost, and I kept passing by a lot of these abandoned, what looked like medium-sized mental asylums or retreats. I did some research, and I found out that's what they were. That's where one of the first tuberculosis treatment center was up in Lake Saranac in Sullivan County, New York, back in the late early 1900s here. So that took off commercially, where there were a lot of retreats and sanatoriums in the area. So you have a lot of these large tracts of land and buildings still lying dormant and empty after that kind of petered out. It was like the silver age of something, they used to call it. It was a span of 15 years, I think. So you're right, Chest. Having a privatized mental health sanatoriums come back into play, I think that would be the way to go. Definitely.
Yeah. And I think, too, as far as treatment is concerned, I've always seen personally, anecdotally, that CBT therapy is always much better than standard talk therapy. That cognitive behavioral therapy based on changing the behaviors of the person and putting them into either new situations or some type of routine is vastly better than simply talking about your problems and having someone to bounce back your thoughts to you over a number of sessions. I also believe that there's an over-reliance on medication, that in many cases the missing chemicals from the SSRIs can be brought back up and managed by exercise and diet changes first, prior to creating some type of reliance on those types of mood-altering medications.
Yeah.
These are all things that I see immediately that where certain industries will be impacted greatly by this financially, and that's part of the reason why the system is the way that it is. They would rather, drug your wife and have her, miserable from age 40 to 60 on SSRIs as opposed to, having her take walks with you or go to the gym with you. So that's a major issue, I think, with a lot of why these issues don't get resolved. It's just that we've taken a Band-Aid approach to everything instead of a holistic approach to the treatment.
Oh, no, I completely agree with you. Absolutely. And that's something that would be, I hesitate to say should, but it would be a good practice to keep in mind going forward with something like this, is taking a holistic approach, because they're called, there's an official name for them, but there's a lot of autoimmune diseases of the brain and encephalitis kind of things that mimic depression, schizophrenia, and a variety of clinical mental illnesses that it's when treated differently. So there has to be a very like a large panel of tests that need to be run before anything gets put into place. So, and sometimes it doesn't happen.
Yeah, and a lot of times I just think it's you go to a couple of therapy sessions and your psychiatrist is sitting across from you and just says, well, I think you're depressed. Have you ever been on an antidepressant before? Well, no. Well, just to let you know, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 months for it to finally start working. And, sometimes the first one we give you isn't the first one that's going to work. So we're going to guinea pig you for the next 6 to 18 months on some drug cocktail to see if any of it makes you feel better, makes you feel worse, or, your problem naturally goes away because it's possibly situational to begin with.
It's acute, and a lot of times it's also you have to reach an optimal dosage. Everyone's body's different, so like 5 milligrams of something is not going to work on a 230-pound dude versus a 150-pound dude. So
Right,
Yeah.
but a self-regulating body that produces endorphins when you do a squat or a bench press, particularly if you're a guy, is your own body giving you feel-good chemicals for doing work,
Mhm.
and that's something that doesn't need to be dosed or given any type of ramping up or ramping down, because it's not an external
It's all
stimuli
internal.
to
Yeah.
create a good feeling. So again, it's another reason for guys to lift, is the mental health aspects of it.
definitely.
It's just not the
Oh,
appearance.
yeah, absolutely. No, you're correct. And that was another thing about the mental asylums and the sanatoriums is there was a work regimen that was incorporated
Well,
into their daily itinerary.
I'm going to throw this out there is I think that that's why there wasn't as much mental illness back in the day, is because people were too busy preoccupied with survival.
I was just saying
And
they're trying to fucking survive and not get eaten by the bear.
yeah, well, I'm just saying that yeah, exactly. Well, no, exactly. It's like, this is why I recommend and I think if I was going to, we're talking about solutions. Look, I know that every constitutionalist and liberty lover and whatever is going to freak out when I suggest this, but if we had some sort of national service that actually gave young men a kick in the ass and made them go to bed at night, whatever's going to cause young men to do an honest day's work, be productive, have agency and purpose, and go to bed exhausted,
In the military?
that would be good.
Yeah, you go the Israeli route. Yeah, compulsory military service.
Look, I know people are going to freak out in America about that kind of stuff, and I'd say, yes, I understand your concerns, but I'm saying what's going on right now is not working, and other nations have national service requirements, like Switzerland, and they probably don't have as much. And I'm not saying that that's the only reason. I'm saying part of our problem is our lives are too easy. We need more strenuous activities. We need more hard labor, especially for men. They need to go to bed exhausted from physical labor. That will keep them from being mentally ill. Mental illness is the result of people who are not working hard enough. And
well, there are clinical,
not all the time. I'm not saying all of it. I'm just saying that my point is, like, with a lot of the anxieties that's going on, with a lot of all these
some of the new stuff, these fake. I understand what you're saying, TJ.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of fake shit out there. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll cut out a lot of that crap. The other thing to do with we need to understand, and this is the hard part. This is the difficulty, is that a lot of people are in denial about the effects of our modern world. And so when people are having struggles with it, we say, "Oh, that's not a problem. It's just you. It's your fault. You're not responding well." And, here's an example of what will drive a man mad. If you take a 22-year-old, 21-year-old man and he's surrounded by a community that's trying to convince him that it's still the 1950s, in terms of employment, the economy, investing, housing, and marriage, that man will go insane, or he will experience trauma, because the environment, his community, will be telling him that a reality that does not exist. They'll be telling him that it's raining outside and it's sunny. So I think that's the cause of a lot of anxiety, is like what people are saying is so far removed from what's actually going on that his conclusion is these people are insane, or I'm not seeing something. And most of the time, people are not willing to accept, no, these people are absolutely insane. They should all be locked up. Like, if you say certain things to me, sometimes I'll have, not with you, but like with some people, I kind of give them a blank look, because I'm thinking this person should be locked up. This person should not be allowed to be part of society. Their perception of reality is so far removed from what's actually going on that they can't be they can't be an honest mistake. There's not where it's like, oh, well, you didn't keep up with stuff. Like, you have to be living in a hole, and it's not woeful ignorance, it's willful ignorance. They just don't want to accept something. Yes, Danielle, cognitive dissonance is absolutely devastating. In terms of what the damage it can cause for people who are younger, because they haven't had enough life experience to understand that there are people out there who will say things that are so delusional that, and yet still function. These people are delusional, yet they're still able to carry on a successful job. They're still able to do a career. They're still able to get up in the morning and put their clothes on, but they believe things that are just insane that you can't possibly believe. Yeah, some school. Yeah, I just see it more as like it's funny we talk about quarantining and we need to social distance. We need to separate people who behave like this, and so I guess that's kind of all I have to say. Chess, you got any thoughts?
Well, I think too, part of it, as far as the social component of it that you're discussing, um, as an anecdote from my own experience, one of the largest growing areas in the law is Social Security disability benefits, and 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 one of the
Lovely.
reasons why, is that people have figured out that if they don't really want to work hard at something, it's easier for them to apply for one of the many benefit packages that come with having a mental disability, whether it be permanently distressed or depressed or anxiety, generalized anxiety, PTSD from a bad breakup in the 90s, whatever. And what ends up happening is that government is discovering that we don't really have enough work for everyone, and they are granting more and more of these applications because I personally believe, based on the way that the money is going and how it's being doled out, that this is a socially acceptable form of universal basic income.
Yes.
If you can prove a disability, you then receive money which gets recycled back into the economy, and we also don't have to worry about your crazy ass at the workplace. So you're serving two functions. Right. You're exiting yourself from the workplace and being less of a toxic influence over all of those working around you. You get a little bit of money to live, and then you end up spending it on dumb shit and putting it back into the economy as a whole, and the whole ecosystem ends up benefiting from you because you're spending but not necessarily working. And as time moves on, I really do believe that a lot of the jobs that are out there are going to be automated, and that this is one of the I would guess say band-aid solutions to the problem of underemployment, is simply just giving people money who would already be a nuisance to the system as it is because they have certain disorders, and getting them to at least be consumers, at least put in on the consumer end, regardless of whether or not they can actually be productive members of society.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely think that for some people, it's like you got to figure out what's wrong with what are they suffering from and what is causing it. So what's the solution? For some people, there is no solution. You lock them up. You just the priority is to keep them away from other people. That's for some people. That's probably for a very extreme example. I think with a lot of these, for example, with some of these veterans, they just need to be given I knew an Army person once, and they said they literally need to have someone telling them what to do all the time. That's just that is their psychology. They are, I don't want to say they're low IQ. They're very good at what they do. They may be very good as being a grunt, like an infantry guy, or maybe they're good at mechanics, but they need to have someone giving them orders or instructions. And the Army provided that order for them, that discipline. And once they got discharged, that fell apart for them. I mean, that's a theory. I don't know if that's true because I've never been in the military, but I feel like for a lot of these people, this is why it's like benevolent, not nanny state, but benevolent dictator kind of attitude of these people. Here's the thing. If they're on the street doing drugs, they're going to end up dead. So what difference does it make if we remove them from the street and we put them in an environment where they don't get to, like.
People have a
I
problem.
mean,
People have a problem with your intent. That's the issue.
well, all I can say is,
I mean, both things probably being equal if you put them on the scale and you looked at it objectively. Yeah, you're right, but it's the intent behind it, because people are all about what you think and your intent and what goes.
yeah. Well,
what
my
goes
intent
your
is
intention.
my intent is to beat the living daylights out of people who think that it's okay for someone. No, I've talked to former homeless people who said, like, look, your survival rate on the street, you're gonna die either of other homeless people know that they can kill other homeless people and there won't be consequences socially. You kill a child, you're gonna have the whole police department down on you, and there's gonna be laws enacted. You kill a homeless person, nobody cares. So
That's true.
homeless people are incredibly vulnerable politically and socially. And it's so funny that they talk about how much they care about homeless people. What happens when homeless people kill each other? Do we have outrages? It's like, well, it happens. We need to spend more money on homeless programs so that the homeless industrial complex can get their shekels, because they're grifters too.
Well, exactly.
You know what, that I think
the
I think
administration gets the money, not the homeless people. So,
right.
All
Well,
right,
for
everyone,
example, if you don't have a home, go ahead.
I was about to say we're coming up on the hour and 40-minute mark, and I have another. I'm a guest on another show, so I want to wrap it up. Just TJ, is there any final words you want to say about the subject, and be brief?
Yeah, just give mental sanitariums or asylums or whatever term you want to use, and a chance again, because I think that there is a needed place for them, and I believe that group settings and a sense of purpose will help more people in the long run than outpatient therapy.
Agreed. I could not have said it better myself. TJ?
I don't see a peaceful solution to this. I'll leave it at that.
Enough said.
Everything will be solved with bloodshed. That's the end of every show with TJ. Everything will be solved with violence.
Violence is golden.
It's like I left on a message. Destruction has been decreed, overwhelming and righteous.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah, that was a good photo. All right, let's do a little bit of housekeeping here. TJ, where can everyone find you?
tjmartinell.com.
Fantastic. Chess, is there anything you're working on you want to plug, or where can everyone find you if they so desire?
Yeah, I'm found on Twitter, Rule Zero Dad on Twitter. I also do a lot of modding on just about everything. Sometimes I'm a guest on shows. I don't make any money for this, but I like contributing. And other than that, just don't take any wooden nickels.
That's right. That's what my father would always say. Don't take any wooden nickels. And I finally figured it out. All right, cool. So remember, everyone, don't take any wood nickels. Keep the lead flying down range. And I'm going to be on Red Sings the Blues. Just go onto YouTube and go into Red Sings the Blues. I'm going to be on that show next. And I want to do another one of these. I want to do a follow-up. So I think there's a lot to discuss here. So we'll make that happen in the new year. So everyone, it's been fantastic. I've enjoyed the chat. I've enjoyed having TJ and Chest on to discuss this very important topic, and we will be back again. So in the meantime, well, go over and catch me on the Red Sings the Blues. Oh, and also, I forgot. On Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern, we're going to have Richard Cooper on. Because, yes, Richard Cooper is a secret geek, and you're going to find out just how much he is. So, there you go, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, Masculine Geek Talks with Richard Cooper. So, all right, everyone, have a good night and enjoy the rest of your weekends. See you later tonight and tomorrow.